we jump into the presentations, Alex from Founderspace is going to give a little intro to the space.
Hi everyone, my name is Alex, and I'm here from Founderspace. Welcome. Very glad to see a very nice amount of people showing up today. It's always a pleasure working with the guys from the Bitcoin Meetup. Just a couple of words about what we do here. So Founderspace is first of all an accelerator program, which we run right here. The cool thing about the program is it's only a 4-week intensive program for startups. You get in, learn the stuff you need to know, get out. Within these 4 weeks, we have a great team of mentors. They're going to help you with all of your questions, and they're going to guide you through the whole process from the very beginning to the very end. We're going to plug you as well to our network of advisors, investors, and lawyers to help you along the way. And if you have any questions, because I don't want to talk a lot about this, I just want to get the program started right away, I'll be sitting somewhere around here. Just a few points of some very useful information. The bathrooms are on the 2nd floor, for that round door which you use to come in here. And when you leave, please make sure that the door closes right before you leave, because if we keep the door open for more than 18 seconds, then the alarm goes off, and then firemen, clear police, lots of trouble. We don't want that. Yeah, right. Thanks a lot, guys, and I'll leave it to our... Yes?
And also, if you need Wi-Fi, all the info is right here. And we have a lightning talk sign-up sheet by the pizzas in the back, so if you want to give a minute talk on anything, you can put like a website down and we'll bring up the website, and we'll do that after the talks as usual. All right, so our first speaker tonight is Devon from Blocktech. He's the CEO, and he's going to be talking about how peer-to-peer technologies and blockchains can help artists.
Thanks, Paige. Everyone hear me all right?
Yeah.
Cool. I kind of had to come up with that title on a moment's notice. In reality, my talk is kind of more about how distributed applications in general can really enable everyone, which is a big deal for me. The first time I heard the term distributed applications, I was on a Skype call with some Meetup organizers for Ethereum. And they were talking about how they wanted third-party developers to create these things, these smart contracts. Vitalik always insisted they were called smart contracts, and that's what they were, of course, technically. But what we started talking about was that they were a lot more than that. You know, when it comes to how the user actually interacts with it, in reality they were apps. You know, the blockchain was their operating system, and they weren't normal apps. You know, they were running on this consensus mechanism. They were distributed apps. We all love this term instantly. We realized that, of course, we had and loved a number of distributed apps already with Bittorrent clients and Bitcoin itself. This is a distributed app. And we started seeing people start using this term very often within the kind of Bitcoin community, developing their own apps and stuff like that. But what we noticed was that many of the apps that were being developed were just as kind of single purpose as Bittorrent or Bitcoin. And often within the kind of blockchain industry, they were very much still doing payments, remittance, and all the kind of low-hanging fruit of the kind of financial industry that obviously Bitcoin makes sense for. And these are enormous in their own right, but we felt like the true impact of the blockchain could be actually quite a bit larger. It could be the operating system back-end for distributed apps that didn't have just one core function. Apps that could work the way that normal consumer apps like iTunes or kind of any other kind of an app that you're used to using can work, but without the central points of failure that we're used to within these apps, without having to rely entirely on the servers of the company that makes this particular app. By combining various P2P technologies, you could take all these central points of failure out of it and deliver just the same experience, same quality experience that people are used to. And do so in an entirely peer-to-peer manner, entirely open source manner. This is really fantastic for us. We could do more than just distributed banking and derivatives of it. We could actually do commerce over the internet. We could change how commerce happens and how media distribution happens, not just by making the payment process more efficient, but by automating as much as possible, by taking advantage of this concept of machines being able to pay machines to change everything about it, to enable the audience to be involved in the distribution process, to take the expensive middlemen out of the process entirely and make the artists make more money, make the audience spend a little bit less, and have a lot more freedom over how they're choosing to use the app. So we set out to build Alexandria to do exactly that. But before I get into kind of how it works technically, I wanted to talk a little bit about my own somewhat circuitous path that I took to discovering the blockchain, because I think it illuminates kind of the philosophy behind the app, and why we feel that it kind of is an example of a new type of software that we think is really going to have a significant impact in the world. So first, a little background. A few years ago, I was working in the visual effects industry. I was on an independent film with like a post-apocalyptic New York City skyline thing, where the producers wanted a skyscraper off in the distance to explode and collapse as our heroes kind of walked through a mirror, or through a window rather. So I comp out the window and built a little city of New York, and then I set to work to figure out how to blow up a building. And I am having some trouble with it looking realistic, like how the building falls and everything, and so I turned to YouTube and think, where can I find an example of a building collapsing, of a skyscraper collapsing? And I searched for 9/11 building collapse. And I discovered the other side of YouTube. I was unaware of this before this point. The tin hat wearers and the conspiracy theorists just had video after video after video that poked holes in the official story and kind of suggested their own theories, whether it be complete government complicity in this whole thing, or just the FBI trying to kind of obscure evidence to hide that they really screwed up big time. And for me, this was a really big deal, because 9/11 was more than just something I watched on TV. It was something that impacted almost a decade of my life. 9 months before 9/11, I was signing up to join the Marine Corps Reserve as an infantryman, because I thought, hey, if I'm going to get my college paid for and only have to go 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks a year, I might as well blow stuff up on the weekends. That'll be fun. Well, 9/11 happened, and that changed pretty dramatically. We got activated. We had a West Coast QRF mission to make sure that no further terrorist events happened. And then very quickly, they decided that our unit was going to go ahead and be on the front lines of the invasion of Iraq. And I got to witness, kind of with this first-hand view, the awesome power of an empire just destroying a foreign country. Then I went to Africa, where my job was to kind of watch the back door into Al-Qaeda and make sure that the impoverished people of the Horn of Africa weren't being recruited into Al-Qaeda. And so, pretty obviously, the events of 9/11 had a really dramatic impact on my life, and so it really mattered to me. And just discovering that there were people questioning this really blew my mind. Just opened it up and made me think, so wait, the media and the government might not be telling me the truth about everything? This is ridiculous. I know, right? So at that point, I just felt like I needed to learn more about the world. And so I started getting into, commerce or economic blogs and international magazines and geopolitical blogs, and learning as much as I could. But the more that I learned, the more kind of proud I was of my kind of knowledge of the world and my worldliness and whatnot, but I was also getting very depressed. There was a lot of really depressing stuff going on that I was learning about. I joined the anti-war movement. I protested in the streets. I went with a bunch of vets to DC to meet with congressmen and senators and the White House and the State Department and try to convince them that we're going about this all wrong. And and of course, they nod their heads and they say, oh, vets are great, we love you guys, and then, they go with where the money is, and they vote to send more troops into Afghanistan. And I'm just kind of like having all these illusions about the world shattered. And I'm learning that our food supply is basically owned by, say, a half dozen or so chemical companies. Our media is entirely controlled by about a half a dozen enormous conglomerates. As of right now, I think 20 minutes ago, there was a few thousand troops that are moving into Baltimore right now because of riots over this sense that there's just way too much police violence in our country, and that there's far too many Americans that are still very much living in economic depression. As of this morning, there's reports that Iranians boarded a freighter that we have to protect. So there's all these terrible things that are going on. There's all these cliffs that we're kind of driving toward. We're fighting foreign wars all over the world. Some people think we're fighting proxy wars against the bear itself in Ukraine, Syria, now in Yemen. And so how can I possibly kind of look at the world and not just be ultimately depressed? I discovered Bitcoin, and I thought, this thing's really cool. You know, it's really spiffy. And the more I learned about it, I'm like, this is just amazingly brilliant. But I was kind of feeling like this is Martha Stewart polishing the brass in the Titanic. It's all going down. You know, like who cares if we've got magic internet money if we're going to get into a nuclear war with Russia? Or if terrorists are going to backpack bomb all of our cities, or, you know, any of these things. And at that point, I kind of discovered this cyclical generational pattern these guys named Strauss and Howe discovered. They kind of changed everything for me. They figured out that there's these long patterns, at least in American history, and they started figuring out that these patterns also exist in most of Europe, of about 80 years between really major events. 80 years ago was World War II, 80 years before that was the Civil War, 80 years before that was the Revolutionary War, and it keeps on going. And then that breaks down into these kind of sub-patterns of 20 years, where really dramatic kind of things can change in society. They're trying to figure out why this is happening. And their theory is that the natural human lifespan is about 80 years. It's divided into 4 different sections of life. From birth until 20 years old or so, we're entirely dependent on our parents. We don't have a very strong voice in the world. 20 to 40, we're kind of growing in our influence in the world. We're reducing our dependence on other people. 40 to 60, we really should be the most powerful. We kind of are going to be in the world. We're the leaders of industry and business and government, etc. And then 60 to 80 or longer if we're lucky. We're in the waning years. We're losing our influence in the world. And what they noticed was that during periods when these 4 generational groups were shifting their places in society, say for example as the baby boomers are retiring out and Gen Xers are starting to take over business, and the millennials are starting to actually have a voice and go out in the streets and protest, really dramatic shifts in the direction that the entire world is going can happen just very suddenly. And a great example of this is in the turn of the 19th, 20th century, there was a serious problem with manure in New York City. All of commerce and transportation was driven by horses, and manure was just piling up everywhere, and no one could figure out what to do about it. They had a big meeting in Paris to try to figure out what are you going to do with the manure building up in all these major cities around the world, and no one could figure out a solution to this. And then eventually they discovered the car. Now I say discovered because it was invented probably 20 years before it started getting any traction. But in one of these generational shifts, as an old generation who maybe had some investment in the manure industry, I don't know, or in the horse feeding industry, I don't know, who had pushed back against the horseless carriage previously, stepped out, and new people that were like, ooh, technology, this is great, are starting to be in charge. They said, let's use the car, and it takes off rampantly, and suddenly there's no more problem with this thing that once people thought we were going to have 30 feet of manure in the streets in New York City. And it was completely unavoidable. So that's where we find ourselves right now. You know, according to the kind of worldview I'm starting to form, we're very much driving off a cliff. We have all this momentum, we're going toward this cliff, and there's no signs that we're going to be changing direction anytime soon. How could this possibly be averted? How could we not run into nuclear war with Russia? How could we not have complete economic collapse, etc.? But the reality is that because it's happening, and especially because there's so much more information awareness that so many more people know that these things are happening and are working feverishly on finding the solutions to these problems, and this unique opportunity that happens during these generational shifts, big changes take place. We make our dramatic left turn at the last second, and we save the world. In this case, when I learned about the theory, it kind of changed my worldview about the entire world, and I felt like, we're saved. This is all fine. I didn't know why yet, but I realized that I already knew one of the tools that was going to do it, Bitcoin, or at least the technology behind it, blockchain. But it was more, historically, these have always been more than just a simple technological change. They've usually been kind of philosophical changes as well. The Revolutionary War is the idea that a government should and could make at its very core purpose protecting the liberties of its people. The Civil War, some people would argue, is about states' rights, but overall the thing that came out of it was the idea that that not just white people have the right to be free. Some people could say that World War II, the philosophical thought that kind of went through was that the common everyday man could actually fight off and destroy tyranny. Well, what is our big philosophical change? What is our big idea? I personally believe that it's the empowerment of the individual, because we finally have the technology to truly do that. Largely through software that enables truly peer-to-peer economic activity in all areas of our lives. Most of history, most of human economic history is peer-to-peer economic activity, and we've only lost it in the last 50, 100 years or so. And it's really disconnected us from our money, from how things are made, from who makes them, from who gets the reward from them, etc. And I don't think it's a very good trend. And I see a lot of reason to believe that we're going to be reversing it. If you think about it, power is really organized effort. You can have a whole bunch of resources, but if you can't organize them into the same direction, you're not very powerful. If you can organize them to do the same thing, that's actual power. So previously, the only way you can kind of organize power was with central control, governments, NGOs, corporations. But what the blockchain, Bitcoin enabled is the ability for people all around the world to just kind of consensus vote. I'm into this, I'm going to devote my resources toward it, and yet no one controls it. If there's a fork in the chain, someone decides, I think this is more valuable, and you decide to vote with your mining to go in that direction, that's your voting. You know, this is an actual democratic process that is also massive and new in that way. But we're also seeing the emergence of a number of other kind of quasi-P2P platforms, like ride-sharing, couch renting, and I would even argue that web commerce engines like Amazon and media distribution engines like iTunes kind of fall into that same category. They're not decentralized, but they rely almost entirely on a peer-to-peer business model. Airbnb doesn't own the houses that it rents out. Lyft relies entirely on a fleet of unprofessional neighbors driving neighbors. Amazon makes almost none of the products that it sells, YouTube, so on. You get the idea. Basically, all they really do is they facilitate the discovery process that connects the buyers and the sellers in the whole process. And in some cases, they take a really large chunk in order to do so because central control is expensive. With as big as YouTube is, and is hundreds of millions of videos and hundreds of millions of people watching them, $5 billion of revenue last year from the 50% cut they're taking from their content creators, they're still not profitable because the cost of central control is way too high still. So, what YouTube really did was it demonstrated that free is the right target price for digital content, and that there is absolutely enormous demand for content that doesn't need to be purchased. And the rise of crowdfunding really proves that people are very much willing to support the artists as they love. But we believe that because of those kind of costly central points of failure, there are much more efficient ways to do it that will ultimately defeat all of these kind of central mechanisms. So that's exactly what we set out to do with our first distributed app. Call it Alexandria, and it is a P2P library of art, history, and culture. Essentially, you can think of it as YouTube or Spotify, but without servers and with built-in payment rails. So it's truly like a peer-to-peer marketplace of content, with all the features that users should expect from a content app, but with no middlemen, no servers, and no outside control of any sort. So here's how it works, basically. The app relies on API calls that basically just ask a background process that is communicating with the blockchain for its index of content. It communicates two-way, it can submit new content, and it can browse the index for the information. The user can either, in our kind of dev version, this is kind of light, but right now you can click this and it'll click the local, or switch between localhost and dev. And what they're doing is they can either talk to our central hosted server that does have its own blockchain if they choose to, because they don't want to download a copy of their blockchain, they haven't updated in a little while, whatever else, or if they want it to be a truly peer-to-peer process, they can download and sync and update their own local copy of the library, or of the blockchain, and switch this to localhost, and the app works entirely peer-to-peer. With a really simple, straightforward process, they create a publisher account basically just by attaching a name, and by name I just mean kind of a moniker of sorts, to an address so that they can receive tips. And then with another very simple process, and again you don't see any of this behind the scenes, but with another simple process they can submit content of basically any kind just by signing a transaction with that same address. So they can sync, or they can rather publish their 3D printable phone case, their cat videos, their feature film, their alt hardcore rap LP, their Bitcoin book, whatever they like. We embed whatever we can. Video can stream embedded, audio can stream embedded, PDFs and a couple of ebook formats can all kind of embed in the app. They've all got magnet links so that you can actually download it with a third-party app if you just want to keep the content locally. The submission process basically just involves submitting a transaction with metadata that describes what it is so that it's searchable and findable. You know, what is the genre that it's in, what's the name of it, what's your description, all the stuff that you would normally put into YouTube or SoundCloud or whatever else. Along with a hash that basically identifies how you can find it within the BitTorrent mainline DHT. Right now we're using the mainline DHT. We're very excited to work with the IPFS team to use their DHT instead. It's got a lot of additional functionality, it's a lot faster, it's really quite awesome. They can choose to monetize it however they would like. They can take optional tips. Right now we also give them the option to do like a pay what you want wall. Let me show you an example of that. Where a user is forced to do something, to pay something, but it's up to them to decide how much they want to pay. If someone chooses to set a minimum requirement of 0, they could in fact choose to just send nothing and they'll get the content anyway. I don't have any Bitcoin on this computer, so I'm not going to show you that. But you can see obviously it blocks my ability to see it. We want to also add other monetization options. We're going to be working with a company called Rivets to do kind of a distributed DRM mechanism so that the hardware has access to the keys that enable it to open an encrypted file that's being distributed totally peer-to-peer. That way you can still rely on the crowd to distribute your content, but it's locked in a way that no one can have access to it. And only if you use this smart contract system, you send a payment, it enables your CPU to have access to it, and you actually have the ability to say, well, I don't want this one to do it, I want my phone to do it, or this one, or whatever else. So we can get around all of the really irritating things when it comes to the DRM process with, say, iTunes, for example. It's really quite a hassle if you've got more than 5 devices or if you want to turn off one other one because you have to talk to their central server. Because we're designing this so that it's entirely in the individual user's hands, it makes it a lot easier. But we're basically open-minded about as many different monetization mechanisms that we can provide in a truly peer-to-peer way, where it isn't going to rely on someone clicking a button and saying, okay. We'll avoid that, and anything else is open to us. Also, if anyone that knows anything kind of about BitTorrent knows that your ability to get a file off the BitTorrent network really depends on how many peers have access to it, how many people are seeding it right now. And if a particular video, like my cat video here, isn't quite popular enough to have enough users actively watching it right at this moment, that when I come along and want to click it, I'm going to have a good seed rate, I can actually spend, say, $1 or so to get 100 users to see that file for me for a year. So the publishing cost is almost nil. It's basically just a mining fee to incentivize miners to put that content into it. Right now it's a cent. It's likely going to go up to something around $1. And then the distribution cost, if you need to, if you've got a super popular piece of content that's going to be have enough seeders in and of itself from its own popularity, you're good. If you do need to pay for it, it's going to be something like $1. So between these two different processes, you've got something that's permanent, that you can't change, that can be distributed to anyone, that no one can block because they're relying entirely on these kind of two different peer-to-peer technologies. Now you as a user can choose to delist your media if you so choose. All this really involves though is it's going to remove it from the browser, the Alexandria browser, because obviously, I'm assuming that there aren't too many newbies in here, but if you don't know this, the most basic thing about blockchains is that once you put something in it, it isn't going to come back out. So what gets published is published in a very permanent way to nerds and hackers that want to deep dive into the actual blockchain. To the end users, they have the same experience where if they choose to delist a piece of media, no one else is going to see it, that's fine and dandy. And yes, we are taking some steps to prevent people from being able to publish feature films that they don't own, other pirated content, because we see this as something that not just indies and kind of us crypto anarchists are interested in, but something that can actually provide a better, kind of more efficient platform for film studios and for record labels. So we want to, where they've had a very kind of aggressive and anti-that attitude toward BitTorrent in the past, we want to show that this is really just an enabling technology, where they spend an enormous amount of money to distribute their content, and pirates spend nothing, and they get better distribution. So why not actually co-opt that kind of technology to enable all of us to to be able to have more freedom of how we express ourselves. So the things like those YouTube videos that kind of blew my mind are more protected. Whether they're honest or not, I want them to be protected. I believe in the right to freedom of speech, and that it isn't just an American thing, that this is a human thing, and the internet proves that it's possible. So what we set out to do is kind of bake the concept of freedom of speech into the internet itself. So I'll try to show you a little bit of a demo here. We don't have port discovery working, and the Wi-Fi is kind of blocked off, so some of these aren't really working yet. Anyone that wants to see it, if this isn't working, come meet me out. Oh, good.
Okay, I get it. We don't want you. Just go along with it. Okay, I get it. We don't want you. Just go along with it, okay?
Moldy Mold likes you. What are you going to do about it? You know what? Probably nothing, okay? Because I don't want to talk about this anymore.
In the 9 months since we first heard about it.
So the reason I'm stoked that this is working is because it kind of proves that it works better than we kind of thought it would. We expected that you'd need about a dozen decent seeders to be able to stream HD content quickly. Right now, I think there's probably 3 people that are actually sharing this content right now, and we're getting 720p HD playback. So with this, you can do flat lossless audio, which I think is a really big deal for the music industry, because they've been unable to deliver lossless quality audio for 20 years since the record disappeared. And then obviously 720p or 1080p video. So, I don't know where we're at on time. Do we have a couple minutes for questions still?
We can do 1 or 2 questions.
1 or 2 questions, all right.
Yeah.
Good?
So on your website, you're raising money,
Mhm.
$6,000.
Mm-hmm.
How are you going to do that money?
Developing. This is alpha. It still has a kind of a memory leak that's annoying as hell. There's, as you saw in the library, there's only 5 submissions. Only the developers are submitting right now. We're not ready to kind of open the floodgates yet. We've got a couple dozen alpha users that are anxious to do so. But we want to make sure that a few other things are kind of in place before we do so. So we've got, I mean, actually, if you look at the website, there is a very extensive list of the kind of future plans for this. This is the most basic proof of concept working, which is awesome.
Are you selling equity?
We are above certain amounts simply because the SEC basically just said that we can now as of like a couple of weeks ago. When we started the crowdfunding campaign, we weren't planning to, but above say a few thousand, we would absolutely be open to do so, because this isn't a crowd sale of coins where a lot of companies have kind of launched a coin pre-sale. The coin that we're using is already on the market. It's already getting mined and hashed. We didn't see any value in forking it just so that we can have a pre-sale of a coin. And we see there being a lot of value for the community in this, and as we start to kind of show to larger and larger groups, the very first video we put up was way too technical for kind of a mainstream crowdfunding audience. We're going to do kind of a more spiffy marketing kind of thing a little bit. But really what that is we're developing this one way or the other. That timeline is if we can raise that money, it enables us to focus entirely on it. If we can't, it might take longer, but we're doing this one way or the other. So, anyone else? Go ahead.
So you mentioned Bittorrent and Bitcoin as the sort of technologies that are underlying this. Do you guys have your own blockchain where all these files are like embedded in the blockchain? Or
Yes, right now we're using our own, well, kind of our own, it's not really our own. There's a blockchain called Flooring Coin that lets you put 528 bytes of information in every transaction. One of our lead devs, when we first started the project, had discovered it really early on and was just jazzy excited about it, doing all kinds of little apps on top of it, like love notes and stuff like that. So the whole time that we've been in development, we've been planning on using that. Recently, some people pointed out that there are some ways in which we could, in fact, use Bitcoin or the Bitcoin blockchain. Many people will tell you that that's the only way you can go because it's got all the hashing power in the world. It would create quite a few sacrifices in the way that the app works. You can't, like, we could put just the hash into the Bitcoin blockchain because you have 80 bytes. And then your data is protected, the media itself is protected, but there's no descriptive information, so we don't have an index to search or browse. So there's other routes we can go, but ultimately, we want the app to work. The specific flavor of technology that drives it, whether it be the BitTorrent mainline DHT or the IPFS DHT, and whether it be the Bitcoin blockchain or MadeSafe or Ethereum or Flooring Coin, whatever it's going to be, we're going to make that decision for the sake of the best ultimate outcome of the particular, of the app itself, not the specifics of the community behind any particular coin. Good? Good? Oh,
Last one.
Last one? Okay.
Big
You
fish.
mentioned somebody can delist content that stays in the blockchain.
Yeah.
How does that delisting work? Where's that?
Just sends a new transaction to the blockchain that says delist and references the old one, and it just, the front end says, okay, keep that out. And we're going to use that same thing for pirated content. If something is obvious to us that it's pirated, we're basically just going to put it into a filter list where anyone that's browsing this on the website won't see it. Anyone that's in their app won't see it by default. They can turn off filters because we're not about enforcing mandatory filters, and kind of get the full experience, but it's on them. It's their responsibility. Okay, cool.
Thank you, Devon.
Cool.
Next up, we have Nathan Wilcox, and he's from Least Authority, and he'll be talking about private transactions on a public blockchain, aka Zero Cash.
Right. So I like how Devon kind of mentioned his experience with the big picture and why he feels like decentralization is important. And I hope I can tie my talk into that near the end. Yes, so I'm going to talk about Zero Cash. Who has heard of Zero Cash? Okay. What about Zero Coin? All right. Those are slightly distinct things, but they're made by the same people. Zero Cash is the newer, cooler version. So, who we are. So I work with Least Authority. We're engineers. We focus on security. So we're most well known for working on something called Tahoe Labs, which is a distributed secure storage system. And we also do security audits on a bunch of open source, privacy-preserving, freedom-loving projects. And we're collaborating with some other folks, including the cryptographers behind ZeroCoin, LibSnark, and ZeroCash. And I'll get to LibSnark in a moment. That's sort of the delicious heart of ZeroCash. And we're also going to collaborate with some other cryptocurrency experts who have worked on things like Permacoin, Foxcoin, non-outsourceable proof of work. In the past, we worked on something called Mojo Nation, which is sort of a predecessor to a lot of these new storage networks with payment schemes built in. A long time ago, Zuko, who's the CEO of Least Authority, worked at DigiCash. So that was the 90s, and that was like one of the first attempts to make a purely digital currency. So what are we going to do? We're going to develop the Zero Cash protocol into a working system. So Zero Cash is a cryptographic protocol. It's not a coin or a chain yet. And we're working with the cryptographers behind it to make that happen. So it's going to be a Bitcoin-like system that we're prototyping. But I wanted to point out that the protocol itself can be applied to any ledger. So it's not specific to Bitcoin. It could be used on a centralized system, for example. So I was just going to give you an overview of how the protocol works at a pretty high level, and then talk about what that might mean for the ecosystem and individual empowerment and decentralization. So there are two operations that Zero Cash relies on. One is called protect, or I'm going to call it protect, and the other is called pour. So the idea behind protect is pretty simple. In a Bitcoin-like world, it's where you post a transaction to the blockchain, and that's just going to take your unspent UTXOs, so the value you hold in a Bitcoin address, and put it into a confidential bucket. A quick thing, if you read papers on Zero Cash, I'm using slightly different terminology because I find it less confusing. So the papers say you mint a coin, but I say you protect a bucket. And the reason is the bucket can contain an arbitrary amount of value. I think this is from the earlier work on zero coin, where each coin just had a fixed denomination, and that's not the case in zero cash. So once you have buckets that are confidential, what can you do with them? You can pour them into new buckets, and that's basically it. So the basic kind of pour would have 2 inputs and 2 outputs, and that lets you do things like combine your buckets. It lets you split buckets, and anyone can be the owner of the output bucket. So I can split my own buckets if I want to, or I can split a large bucket and give you part of the value in your own bucket. And there's a constraint that the total amount of value in the incoming buckets is the same as the outgoing buckets, which is hopefully obvious, but it's important to make sure that that's the case. And whoever creates the pour transaction has to own the input buckets. These are 2 good rules for a currency. Anyone can own the output buckets like I just described. Okay, so how is this better than Bitcoin, for example? Because it actually sounds very much like Bitcoin, right? A Bitcoin transaction takes multiple TX ins and sends them to multiple TX outs. So the difference is that only the owners of the buckets know which buckets are involved and how much value is in those buckets. But the miners still know that the value going in and coming out is equal. So that's the weird magic of zero cash. So how is this possible? The answer is with a ZK snark, of course. A what? Yeah, so ZK snark is the cryptographer's term for the engine at the heart of the pour trick. So this stands for zero knowledge, succinct, non-interactive argument of knowledge. See if you can say that over and over and over again. No thanks. So I'll break down each of those. I'll break down the phrase so that it makes sense. The argument of knowledge is the 2 constraints that you want to have on the pour that the miners are going to verify. So that the input value and output value are equal. So the currency is constrained to follow that rule, and also that the input buckets are controlled by the person who made the pour. That's what the argument of knowledge is. There's a little terminology thing. Argument is the cryptographer way to say proof. We're proving to the miners. Technically, an argument, if there were a very, very powerful computer, they could trick miners. Or there's another condition where miners can be tricked, which I'll get to later, or maybe in the question section. Zero knowledge is the other super important bit. So the miners don't know which buckets are the output buckets, and they don't know how much value is in the buckets. Non-interactive is also important. There's a way to do zero knowledge proofs that's interactive, where whoever was creating the pour in this case would have to talk to the miners in an interactive protocol and convince them. We don't want that, because we just want to put the pour on a blockchain, and a year later somebody can come by and verify that and believe in that blockchain. And then succinct seems like a simple thing, but the transactions fit on the blockchain, and the cryptographers have worked very hard to make this possible. Okay, so now we almost have a decentralized currency, but we want to prevent double spends. This part is actually really easy and doesn't involve any crazy crypto goo. Each bucket just has a unique identifier, and once it's spent, that's published. So the pour operation includes the ZK snark magic stuff, but it also just reveals which two buckets are being spent. Right, so if the miner ever sees the same identifier twice, they know that the second one is a double spend. And it's subtle but important to note that the identifiers or the serial numbers for buckets are only revealed in that case. And that way, nobody observing the blockchain can, make a correlation between the same serial number appearing in different situations. So, okay, so that's it. Those are the operations. But now to talk a little bit about why this is awesome for users and the industry. When people talk about privacy and security, what do people usually think about? I think many people often think about advanced tools or complicated protocols or something that they don't necessarily need. They don't need privacy if it's going to be this extra complicated stuff. But I'm going to argue that if we can do zero cache right, it will actually be easier for users to think about and use. It'll be simpler for industry to adopt and to create infrastructure around. And it will be safer for people to use and for the industry. It'll be safer for commerce. Okay, so it's easier because users can just believe one address is one identity, which is perhaps intuitive. That's not the case with Bitcoin, and that's led to a lot of complications. So just to go back, so with zero cache, you might put an address on a billboard for your business, and now you don't have to worry about what privacy implications that has for your customers or yourself. So it's nice that you don't have to worry about that. It's just easy. Do it. So it's simpler for infrastructure because you don't have to keep track of many addresses or their relationships or do things like bit32. So, if you're doing bit32 to deterministically generate keys, how do you know which of those addresses have actually been received by your users, which of those addresses have been used? Do you scan the blockchain? Do you record it in your local MySQL database? What if you lose that database? Also, if you are creating many addresses because you want some kind of privacy guarantees that Bitcoin doesn't have natively, you need to keep track of their relationships locally. And sometimes I wonder if some of the auditing difficulty with Mt. Gox might come from the fact that they don't remember which addresses were used for what purpose or what their relationship is. But that's totally speculative. Zero cache is safer also because you don't want the world seeing all of your transactions necessarily. With zero cache, you have that option, and you can do that if you would like, but you don't have to if you don't like. And you can also selectively reveal your transaction history to only particular auditors, for example. So that might be good for regulation or for auditing. It may be the case that having confidentiality is required by law. So I'm not a lawyer, and I don't know if this is true or not, but it may be the case that if you're dealing with if you're in the medical industry and you're accepting payments from users, you need to protect their financial privacy. So you want to make sure you can do that. So you want confidential transactions. Okay, so here's a chart where, can everyone see that? It might be kind of small. The bottom has corruption resistance going to the right. So as we move right, the system is harder to corrupt. The vertical axis has confidentiality. So if we imagine a centralized ledger or a bank, it's the one on the left here. It's actually a bit more confidential than Bitcoin because I can't see your bank's records. They can see it, and whoever they share it with can see it. So it's not completely confidential, but it's perhaps better than Bitcoin. Bitcoin is amazing and is an innovation because it was able to decentralize tracking of the ledger. So now we don't have to rely on a single authority to verify that the rules are being followed. We all know the rules and everyone's working together to verify them. So that's a lot harder to corrupt, and that's why decentralization can be valuable. But it's come at a cost, which is that it has low confidentiality because everyone is revealing the entire graph of their relationships economically and the values flowing through that graph. And that's a lot of information. Metadata is a lot of information. So zero cash is stepping up so that we have both confidentiality and corruption resistance. So we can have a system that's decentralized. Everyone can contribute to verifying that the rules are followed, but the users also have confidentiality. So that's actually kind of the amazing thing about, so zero cash is like the first example of doing this, right? So it's good for transactions, but what else can we do with this zero knowledge proof stuff? Now we can come up with arbitrary rule sets, maybe, and make systems where whoever is verifying that those rules are being followed doesn't have vision into the user's data directly. So users can have confidentiality, auditors can verify that rules are being followed, and the auditors could be everyone, the general public. So, this can be applied to smart contracts, hopefully. There's still a lot of research and engineering to do here, but maybe this could apply to voting systems, to all kinds of rule verification. So that's it. Greg, do you have a question?
Yeah.
Greg's my plant, by the way, because I didn't have a slide.
Could you elaborate a bit on the trusted setup that's involved with zero cash?
Yeah.
And some of how that works, some of the potential problems that can come up with it, and the mitigations.
Sure. So that was a planted question. But this is a really important point, and I didn't have a slide for it, and he asked me immediately, and I was like, oh yeah, I definitely should talk about that. So this is amazing technology, ZK Snark, but it has trade-offs. So one of the trade-offs is that it relies on a set of parameters. So each thing you want to prove, each logical assertion, needs its own set of parameters. To generate these parameters, you need a secret, and from the secret you derive public data. And the public data is the parameters. If anyone knows the secret, they can fool any verifier into believing statements which are false. So that's terrible, right? So the only way it works is if no one knows the secret. So that's been the main hurdle for making zero cash something real. So what the cryptography team has been working on is I wanted to point out one subtle thing about the failure case here. If in zero cash this happens and somebody knows a backdoor, then what they're able to do is counterfeit, because they can lie about the statement that says the value in is equal to the value out. So they can create value or destroy value. So that's catastrophic. But they don't compromise confidentiality. So that might be important. So the cryptographers are working to create a protocol to create public parameters that involves multiple parties, and the features of the protocol are that if any one participant succeeds at participating and not leaking the secret out of their device and destroying the secret successfully, then the parameters are secure. So if any one participant can do that, then it will be a success. So that's kind of a basic construction that we're developing now to make practical. And we're exploring future ideas like, can we have multiple rituals with increasingly large supersets of participants? So, you know, like each month there's a new ritual on the blockchain. So eventually there's thousands of people participating, and if any one of them does the right thing, then the whole system is secure. But there's a lot of practical trade-offs in that. So that's sort of where we are at with the parameter setup. Other questions?
So you said that in a zero cash transaction, the value of the inputs is equal to the value of outputs. On the Bitcoin blockchain, that's almost never the case. It's very difficult to do the zero fee transaction. But I guess zero cash can be used on top of a blockchain. So how does that work out?
Yeah, actually, so I kind of glossed over, but the actual pour has bucket inputs and bucket outputs, and it also has standard UTXOs. So all of the outgoing value sums to the input value, but some of it is what we call public, and some is confidential. Public is just like Bitcoin value.
What's the consensus algorithm?
We haven't decided that yet. There's a prototype that's just a fork of Bitcoin that's just using SHA-256. I think we're probably, we're considering proof of work, different proof of work functions. But I mean, that's sort of where we're at. In the back?
If I receive a pour into a bucket I control, do I know the total amount that went into both buckets or just into one bucket?
I don't actually know the answer to that. I think you only know the value that's in your bucket.
And do I have to look at every pour on the blockchain to find ones that are mine, or do I have to have a person do the pour tell me in advance to look for one?
You can do it either way. So the prototype that we have, the sender includes the pour includes arbitrary memo for the transaction that the sender can send to the recipient. The recipient can scan the whole blockchain and attempt to decrypt all of the pours. It's using an encryption scheme that does not reveal to the public which public key has been encrypted to, which gives you anonymity of the graph. So that's the fallback. Or there could be a protocol where the sender contacts the recipient, but then you need to also think about anonymity or confidentiality.
And so sort of following that, would that be a way to pay the miners as well, or to them?
Yeah. I might need to think about that more. I actually am not too sure that's possible because the miners are all competing. You don't know who will win a block. If we had something like an opcode that says insert the current Coinbase miner, whoever you are, and we'll pay you, maybe you could do something like that, but it's hard to do in Bitcoin.
Do you have a limit on the memo field?
Yes, but I don't know what it is. It's kind of, right now, a lot of those parameters are kind of arbitrary for us. So we're thinking about it. Oh, but so I assume you're interested in building applications on top.
It's not, I assume, plain text?
No, it's not plain text.
Okay.
So If we made it large enough and it were easy to embed things for an application, it would be kind of nice because the application would have some confidentiality guarantees without needing to worry exactly how that works.
Perhaps there's people in this room that have a threat model that dictates they use Tor all the time or some of the time. And for people like that, I just wanted to make sure that you might mention any Tor integration that the Zero Cache team is planning.
Yep.
Any sort of like communication with the Tor project.
Okay, so David is my coworker. He's the other plant. You need, so the transaction protocol has all this great confidentiality, but if everyone, like if we all have magical envelopes that are sending money between each other and it's confidential, but we all walk up here and post it on the board in front of everyone, it doesn't really help. So you need messaging confidentiality. So we'll probably have some kind of Tor integration, and we also need to be careful about that because you don't want to put an entire blockchain on the Tor network. It might stress it too much, and we don't actually need that for the properties we want. You only need to send the pores over Tor. More questions?
So I suppose if there was although you Bitcoin let you put coins out there, it could be very noticeable. You would see it happen.
Yeah.
If similar mode for Zero Cache, is there any way to detect that?
Not as it exists now. So that's a concern. There are ways, there's kind of a trade-off because if the total amount of Zero Cache that's confidential is known, like if that's a public global value that everyone knows, then you still can't tell if someone's creating some just for these few transactions here, unless you're doing a checkpoint across the whole blockchain, right? So if you know the total, for example, if you know the total is 1,000 or less, somebody can counterfeit up to 1,000. So if you start turning that knob and you have finer and finer grained detection mechanisms, those start to erode the confidentiality. So there's kind of a fundamental tension, as far as I know, there. So that makes the parameter setup even more important to do right. Okay. Thanks.
So if you sign up for a lightning talk, come up here. And if you didn't sign up for a lightning talk, we still have 4 more open spots, so if you want to just get in line. Oh wait. I just forgot to turn my Wi-Fi on to like pull up websites and stuff. Yeah. Well, that's nice.
Who does not have a website?
Yeah, who doesn't have a website? Or, I think I got it. I got it.
Okay. So you can go with that. I got it.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right. Hi everybody. My name is Sergey. I run a service called Bitrefill. We connect Bitcoin to the world of prepaid mobile phones. Now, in America, most people are on subscription plans. But on a worldwide scale, 3/4 of all mobile phones in the world are prepaid. The prepaid balance is like the most widespread digital type of currency that there is. And it's already being used for international remittances, for sending little gifts to people, paying for things, and things like that. And so what Bitrefill does is we have a website, which we'll see soon, where users in 127 countries can convert Bitcoin into prepaid phone credits. And we also have an API in which we let companies in the Bitcoin space or otherwise that in some way hold user funds and want to let users withdraw money to 127 countries, do that at a 0% added fee, which is the really really cool part. Thank you. Show us the website.
Okay.
Yeah. And it works in America too for those who are prepaid.
Okay.
Hi everybody, my name is Flavien. I'm the CEO and founder of CoinPrism. CoinPrism is a wallet for colored coins. So for those who don't know, colored coins is about, it's a technique where you take a small fraction of a Bitcoin, tag it with some metadata using op-return, and then that kind of represents any kind of asset. Could be gold, could be currencies, or investment like a crowd sale. So CoinPrism is a wallet that lets you send, receive, and create the colored coins. And we also have an API, so if you want to build applications using colored coins, you can use the API. And we have also open source software called Color Core. And we have a protocol called OpenAssets, so you can check that out on openassets.org. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Corbin. I'm co-founder of FoldApp. We'll let you save 20% at Starbucks when you use Bitcoin, and other stores, Target and Whole Foods and a bunch of places. Some of you don't understand how that happens. I know because Nathan actually tweeted Eric Voorhees about why that's the case. If you want a free coffee, come talk to me. And yeah, try us at foldapp.com. Thank you.
Great.
Hi everybody, my name is Greg Slepak. I've been noticing something in the cryptocurrency community dialogue. It's this usage of the terms distributed and decentralized, and I just wanted to make a comment on that. A lot of what people seem to call the virtues of cryptocurrencies, they sometimes use the word distributed. But if we look at what the difference between YouTube and, say, Alexandria is, as Devon was talking about earlier, what is the virtue of Alexandria over YouTube? Is it that it's distributed? YouTube is also distributed across the planet. That term has a definition. It just means usually copies distributed around multiple places of something, of data in this case. The real value from Alexandria comes from the fact that it's decentralized. And the OK Turtles Foundation is a nonprofit that supports beneficial decentralization technologies like Alexandria, like doing reviews of protocols, just promoting it via media, etc. And we're going to be doing a crowdfund soon. We're going to incentivize the top 5 donors with one of these aluminum Bitseed boxes that comes with Namecoin and DNS chain installed. Thank you.
My name is Katarina. I'm doing community engagement with Swarm. We started out doing crowdfunding in a way that gave you equity, not just a Kickstarter type of arrangement. And we are evolving now to giving you a platform in which you can launch your own organization that will include a community built in there, as well as crowdfunding tools. And it's distributed. And decentralized. I have a bunch of these posters I'd love to give you. We're spending the next week and a half trying to get people sort of an education campaign to collect pledges and to get people to create their own DCO or join another DCO project as well. So come and talk to me. I have stickers and I have posters. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm the founder of GamerHolic.com. One thing that's obvious is that in the Bitcoin community, you need to have a certain level of IQ to even understand what the hell was just said here today, right? What I do is dumb it down. I make it so you get to win Bitcoins playing video games. It's really easy. Folks are already used to winning points in video games. You transition those points over to Bitcoin, and they don't know the difference. So in this arcade, it's like once the arcade back in the day, you'll put in your 25 cents to play. Your job is just to get on the leaderboard. Each time someone fails to beat your score, you get some of their 25 cents. You can be asleep, you can be at work. As long as you're on the leaderboard, you're earning Bitcoin each time someone fails to beat your score. We also have our own coin, GamerHolic coin, which is a copy of Bitcoin. It is traded on Bittrex right now. We don't claim to be better than Bitcoin. We don't claim to do anything that Bitcoin can't do. We're just a gaming coin that is perfect within the gaming space. We offer an API. There are a lot of things we can do on the education side for it. Thanks.
John? You can go after.
Hi everyone. I work with a company called Bitseed, and we developed this little personal server. Greg held up one of the limited edition versions that we're developing for the OK Turtles crowdfunding campaign. But we started just building these for Bitcoin. So this is like a dedicated plug and play Bitcoin full node that you can just plug into your router, plug into your wall, and within a few hours it's fully synced with the Bitcoin network. We recently launched an assembly project so that designers and developers can help contribute to our open source software and also get financial compensation for doing that. You can check out the product at bitseed.org, and you can check out our assembly project if you want to help contribute at assembly.com/bitseed. Thank you.
Oh, the website will soon be there. Hi, my name is Karsten. I am the founder of the European trading platform Clevercoin. You can't use it, sorry, but still pitch it. Let me ask you one question. Why do people actually use Bitcoin nowadays? To be honest, 90% of people use it for actually trading for profit. But why is exactly that so hard? You can buy Bitcoins on more and more places at the moment. With trading, you always end up using a way too hard trading platform. For this vision, we started Clevercoin. Clevercoin bridges the gap between the brokerage and the trader by making trading easier than ever. We just launched. We have market and limited orders like you are used to, but we just also launched leverage trading in a way that people actually immediately understand the results of leverage trading. And it's been growing in the last 2 months from 2,500 to 8,000 users. That was it.
Thanks. On that point that Greg was saying about decentralized versus distributed, I'm actually working on a kind of a new chart to describe the differences. So I guess that's a little lightning talk to look out for that, because there is this one chart that is basically used in the Bitcoin space that I think is wrong. So hopefully we can set things straight with better charts and visuals. So with that, there's no more lightning talks. We have until 9:30 here, so feel free to hang out. And then I think we're going to go to Hotel Utah, which is a bar on 4th and Bryant? 4th and Bryant, yeah. After, if you want to keep hanging out. So that's like a 10-minute walk or so. Yes, do you have a question?
Can you please include the URL of the lightning talks on the meetup?
Sure, will do.